Off the Wall. My name is Trey. Thank you so much for joining me today. And what a weekend of football we just had. In the IFL Week 13, we had 5 games decided by 3 points or less. Almost all the games in the IFL were tremendous this past weekend. AFL Week 7 was pretty good as well, with 2 high-scoring games that were decided in the final moments. So very fun weekend of football that we'll dive into. We'll start off with the IFL, do a little recap of this past weekend's action, as well as previewing what we got to look forward to next weekend. And then we'll dive into AFL Week 7, talk about the 4 games that took place this past weekend, relatively without a hitch. Things went pretty well, all things considered, and talk about some of the games that were very fun to watch, talk about some of the games that were not as fun to watch, but still some good takeaways from each. But before we dive into any of that, if you're watching on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And heck, I'll one up it this week. Throw a comment on this video as well. Let's see what happens. Let's get crazy. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please make sure you rate and review the show. Helps the algorithm, helps feed it to people. Got a couple of reviews on there that are glowing, if I do say so myself. So I do appreciate the kind words. But yeah, looking to see how we can continue to grow this, and ratings and reviews and subscribes and all that stuff are a good way to help us out here. And if you're not already, please make sure you're following us on Instagram, TikTok, and X/Twitter at Off the Wall FB, F as in foot, B as in ball on each of those. Off the Wall FB, posting all sorts of stuff all throughout the week. And you can go back and look at some of the past videos that we've put out on each. And it's fun to mingle with some of the folks in the old X/Twitter world and get some different perspectives on things and share some real-time thoughts instead of having to wait weekly for the podcast or for some of the blogs to come out. But if you can give us a follow on there and let me know that you listen to the show, comment a football emoji. See how much traction we can get on that. But please give us a follow on there and do all the subscribe, thumbs up, rate, review, all that stuff. It helps. So let's dive right into IFL Week 13. So the first game we're going to talk about of the all Saturday slate, a very rare slate where all 7 games in the IFL took place on Saturday. This one started off a little bit earlier than the rest. This was Green Bay Blizzard at the Massachusetts Pirates. 2 of the top 3 teams in the Eastern Conference standings faced off in Lowell, Massachusetts, and Green Bay won this game 36-33. And starting with Massachusetts, similar to what we talked about with Quad City last week, where I went on a little 6, 7, 8-minute rant. Statistically and just through the eye test, the way that you can somewhat have a chance to beat Green Bay is to run the ball. And if you're Massachusetts, you have one of the most dynamic running backs in all the IFL in Jimmy Robinson. So I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but bear with me. Green Bay has the best passing defense in the entire IFL. They have the 4th worst rushing defense in the entire IFL. Massachusetts has one of the most dynamic running backs in all the IFL, if not the most dynamic running back in the entire league. And they were also starting a backup quarterback because their primary starter, Alejandro Benefield, was not able to go due to injury. So you're facing a number 1 passing defense with a backup quarterback who hasn't really shown a lot. You would think that you would really lean into running the ball early and often. And they eventually did in the second half. But they didn't get it going early enough to really control the game. And Green Bay started off very, very rough in this one. Massachusetts was up, I think, 15-3 at one point, and Green Bay just couldn't get much going. Massachusetts was thoroughly dominating, but they could have put their boot on the throat a little bit more and really put the pressure on Green Bay, but they didn't. So they ran the ball 4 times to Jimmy Robinson on the opening drive. That's great. Love that. Set the tone against that rushing defense that has shown to be a weakness. But after that first drive, they proceeded to throw the ball with their backup quarterback against the number 1 passing defense in the league 16 out of the next 18 plays. 16 out of the next 18 were passes. I don't know what to say to that. Jimmy Robinson ended up with 15 carries for 113 yards and 1 touchdown on the day, with the bulk of those yards and carries coming in the second half when they realized, we have Jimmy Robinson. Let's run the ball. So they got out to that 15-3 lead despite themselves. So if they had focused on running the ball and really feeding Jimmy Robinson early and often, this could have been a 24-3. This could have been a 30-3 lead that really put the pressure on Green Bay to come back, but they just didn't do that. And I just don't understand why they didn't. I don't. I thought the Pirates offense was back after last week, but they're back to being confusing and just I don't understand what's going on and why they approached that game the way that they did. And with the different variables that have been shown on offense, it's starting to look like that it's not a player problem. It's starting to look like it's not an execution problem. It's starting to really look like it's a play calling problem. What are we going to do about that, Massachusetts? On the other side here, Green Bay started off this game really slow, like I said. Things got off to a rocky start for them. One of their primary offensive linemen got hurt and had to be helped off the field, couldn't put any weight on his leg, and that created a bit of a rotating cast of folks that they had to plug in to the left side of the line. That included some defensive linemen that they were plugging in there, hoping to just buy their quarterback some time. Very first play after he was hurt, they gave up a sack on that same side for a safety, so it was very clear from the moment that offensive lineman left the game that they were going to be in a little bit of trouble. But the defense and special teams really came through for Green Bay in this one, specifically Riverius Rivers, the DB for Green Bay. He had 2 interceptions. I think he had 10 solo tackles and a blocked field goal right before halftime. So he was very productive in the first half of the game and kept Green Bay in this one enough to the point where they were able to come back and eventually win this one. Wide receiver Demetrius Moore also contributed on special teams where he had a kick return for a touchdown in the first half that really tugged that momentum back that Massachusetts really wasn't able to capitalize on due to their play calling. So good on Green Bay for not having their best game and still being able to pull off a tough road win in an environment where Massachusetts doesn't lose at home very often. I think in the past 3 or 4 seasons, they've lost a total of four games at home, and this was the 5th one. So that's a pretty good home record for a pretty good team. And the Green Bay did not play their best game, but they still got the win. So that's the mark of a really great team and a championship contender is when they don't play their best game, but they're still able to beat some of the best teams. It seems like the game would have played out much differently had that injury not occurred. They probably would have been able to stick to their identity a little bit more of, Big Ten, run the damn ball, ground and pound, all that stuff. But it just wasn't working with the cast that they had. But they found a way. They are now in sole possession of first place in the Eastern Conference, and that's going to be huge as they have a pretty favorable schedule down the stretch. They play Jacksonville a couple times, and the rest of their opponents are all Eastern Conference teams. So they have a really good shot at securing home field all throughout the playoffs, which is exactly what they need to have that path to the IFL championship. The next game we're going to talk about is the Frisco Fighters at the Quad City Steamwheelers. Frisco came in as 11.5-point favorites, but Quad City pulled off the win here at home, winning 52-49. So Quad City, I would like to thank you for running the damn ball with your running back, PJ Vander. Thank you so much. We talked about it last week. We've talked about it for the past few weeks where he is a very, very, very good running back. He is powerful. He finds ways to get yards after contact consistently. You hand him the ball within 5 yards of the end zone, he's finding his way to the goal line. He makes it happen. And in this game, they fed him early and often. He ended up with 18 carries for 78 yards and 3 touchdowns. And just for reference, the past 3 games combined, he had 20 carries. So 20 over the last 3, but 18 in this last one. And they were able to control the pace of the game, and they were able to stay in this one and stay neck and neck, and not just stay neck and neck, but be able to pull ahead against Frisco, which is not something that happens against a team like Frisco. It's just not. So the offense needs to continue to flow through Vander, and they need to continue to feed him as often as possible. A lot of the league is focused on offenses flowing through dual threat quarterbacks, which as it should, if you have the right quarterback for it, more power to you. But let's face it, Quad City is not in that situation where they're jockeying between 2 quarterbacks, and that continued in this game where they started Mike Irwin. He threw an early pick. They pivoted over to Judd Erickson. So again, this back and forth of This is the guy. No, this is the guy. No, I think this is the guy. No, this might actually be the guy. It continues with Quad City, but they were able to get the win because the offense didn't flow through the quarterback conundrum. It flowed through the running game that has proven to be successful if you feed it. Wide receiver Jared Harrington also had a very clutch kick return touchdown to open the second half, which increased Quad City's lead from 17 to 10 to 24 to 10 and really enabled them to lean on Frisco and run the ball with Vander. So it was just a great game from all sides, and give credit to the defense as well. Frisco averages 50 plus a game. They held them to 10 points in the first half, which is huge. Frisco missed a couple of field goals, and Quad City was able to get off the field early in a lot of situations. And it was just a great team game from Quad City that they really, really needed in order to stay in their spot in the playoff race and continue to hold on to that fourth spot. And on the other side, Frisco played pretty well, all things considered. They just got off to a slow start and they climbed out of the hole, but they just didn't do enough, and they had a couple too many self-inflicted wounds. Like I said earlier, they missed a couple of field goals, and they just seemed to be off schedule due to their slow start. A quarterback TJ Edwards, he had a really good game with 6 total touchdowns, 4 passing and 2 rushing, and he connected with Cole Blackman at wide receiver for some massive plays. He ended up with 5 catches for 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. And they really leaned on Lionel McConnell, who was on the show last week. He's been playing DB a ton this year, but they really leaned on him at wide receiver in this game. He had 10 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. So they couldn't seem to get much going in the ground game, which was shocking to see considering they lead the league in rushing. But a lot of that rushing comes from the quarterback spot. And their productivity at the running back position has not been what they want over the past couple of weeks. And at the time of recording this, Frisco just signed Justin Rankin, who was the first ever guest on Off the Wall. So go back to episode 3 or 4. I want to say 3 or 4, one of those two, to listen to the interview with Justin. But he just signed with Frisco. So he was an all IFL first team running back last year. And he just signed with Frisco, who is already one of the most dangerous offenses in all the IFL. So Frisco's at this point of the season, they reloaded with one of the premier players in the IFL over the past couple of seasons. But I digress. Talking about the Quad City game, despite some of these issues, this game was still within Frisco's grasp, and they could have potentially won this or sent it to overtime. They ended up missing a field goal short, a long field goal at that. And they ended up missing a long field goal short at the end of the game for Quad City to clinch it. But they're now a full game behind Green Bay in the Eastern Conference standings. So they're going to need some help. They're going to need to win the majority of their games and have Green Bay lose a couple in order to leapfrog them and get that number 1 spot. They're looking pretty good since Massachusetts lost to at least get the 2 spot. And like Green Bay, they have a pretty favorable final 5 games of their season, so they should be in a good spot to clinch a playoff berth over the next couple of weeks. But they're going to need a little bit of help to get that number 1 spot in home field all throughout. The next game we're going to talk about is the Tulsa Oilers at the Jacksonville Sharks, and Jacksonville actually won this game 45-42. So Jacksonville has won 2 games this year, and both of them have been against Tulsa. So starting with Tulsa, past couple of weeks, Tulsa's offense has been hot garbage, just terrible to watch. But in this one, they looked pretty damn good in the first half. And it's not shocking that they looked pretty good in the first half with running back Jared Ware coming back from injury in this one. They were doing some long stretch running plays to the outside, some pitches to really stretch the defense horizontally. And they were able to throw the ball with Andre Sale pretty effectively in the first half. But then things got a little squirrely on them in the second half. The Oilers were up 35-18 with 10 minutes left in the third quarter, and they were trading blows with the Sharks, and they had a turnover on downs within 5 yards of the end zone twice in the second half, including one on their final possession with 2 minutes and change left in the fourth that would have put them up by 10. So not totally out of the woods, but being up by 10 with 2 minutes left, much more comfortable spot than being up by 3 with 2 minutes left and the other team having the ball. So finishing drives is something that they've had problems with in the past couple of weeks due to how poorly their offense has been playing. And those old demons kind of poke their head back up in the second half, and they weren't really able to execute a lot of the things that were working in that first half. And they opened the door for Jacksonville to come back in this one. So they need to continue to get wear in open space in the running game and find ways to get positive yards in short yardage situations. Earlier in the season, they were spamming the hell out of the tush push with Daniel Smith. It seemed like if it was a second and one, third and one, third and goal from the one, they lined up the tush push and it was nearly automatic every single time. This time they attempted to run that multiple times and weren't able to get positive yardage. And on that final drive that I alluded to, that's a prime example of it where they gave it a shot, but they got denied and gave Jacksonville the ball back with less than 2 minutes. So this was a step in the right direction for Tulsa, but might be too little too late because they really, really, really needed this one badly to keep any playoff hopes alive. And on the other side, we talked about Jacksonville constantly having that, oh, classic Sharks moment where they play pretty well in the first half, but then just kind of fold on themselves in the second half. But in this game in particular, they came storming back from 17 down. Like I said, with 10 minutes left in the third, they were down 35-18. But Jacksonville came storming back. They were able to get a couple stops on Tulsa, and the offense looked pretty good in the second half. It looked like they were actually making some adjustments, and it looked like the fire sale that they've had on their roster over the past couple of weeks to get some of the old guard out and get some new blood in has worked. It's actually proven to be pretty successful for Jacksonville. And Jacksonville was able to score the go-ahead touchdown with 1 second left in the game. So a very, very clutch moment for Jacksonville. And it was it was good to see that the Sharks played an anti-Sharks game where they weren't just piling on points in garbage time to make it look like they only lost by 14. No, they had a chance to win this game and they took that chance and they were successful in winning against Tulsa for the second time this season. Fred Payton Jr. stepped back in at quarterback for this game and he played really well. He ended up going 19 for 26 for 153 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns, as well as adding 74 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. So this is the type of performance that Jacksonville has needed at quarterback all year, but they've only gotten sparingly. And it seems like Fred Payton Jr. is the guy that can deliver that for them through the rest of this year and potentially into next year, depending on what type of roster decisions they make heading into next season. But yeah, they again, Jacksonville has 2 wins on the year. And they're both against Tulsa. Unfortunately for the Sharks, they don't play the Oilers again this year. So let's see if they can get a win against another opponent. Next week, they have a very tough draw against the number one team in the Eastern Conference, the Green Bay Blizzard, and they have to play them again last game of the season as well. So next week is going to be a big test for the Sharks, but this was a step in the right direction, and it showed that they can make those adjustments that they need to make in order to be competitive in this league. Next game we're going to talk about is the Duke City Gladiators at the San Antonio Gunslingers, and San Antonio won this game 46-45. 1 point victory for San Antonio at home, and this was a lot more interesting and exciting than I think anybody thought it was going to be heading into this week, and it was really the tale of two halves. In the first half, 20 points scored by both teams combined, and it seems like both offenses were just struggling to get any momentum at all. But in the second half, there were 71 points scored, including 56 points in the fourth quarter. 56 points in the fourth quarter. That's 8 touchdowns in the fourth quarter alone. And both offenses just seem to be very dialed in. And I can't believe I just said that both offenses were dialed in a game that included Duke City. I can't believe it, but it's true. It's a fact. In this game, another Duke City quarterback entered the fold. I think that makes for number 6 or 7 on the year to this point. And he ended up being a game changer for the Gladiators offense. The quarterback's name was Hassan Rogers. He signed with Duke City earlier in the week, and they worked him into the game kind of as a change of pace running option at first, but he was letting it rip. He was spinning the ball, and he looked really good passing the ball. He ended up going 5 for 6 passing for 117 yards and 3 touchdowns, and he ran the ball 11 times for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he was averaging, what was that, 117 divided by 5, do some quick math here, 24 yards per completion. That's outstanding in the indoor game. Absolutely outstanding. If I'm Duke City, I let him take over as starting quarterback next week. You know what you have in quarterback Javin Kilgo. He's shown what he is and what he's about up to this point. So why not give Rodgers a whirl moving forward and see if he can be the guy heading into the future? He looked very, very fast with the ball in his hands. They ran some quarterback draws where he was able to disguise as if he was passing for a little bit, then tuck it, and he darted out of the pocket and was able to gain some positive yardage very quickly. He looked physically impressive out there, and I want to see more. Like selfishly, I want to see more of Hassan Rodgers in this Duke City offense. And he also looks surprisingly connected with his receivers as well. So he signed 2 or 3 days before the game, and he looked in sync on some really deep balls. So I really want to see what Rodgers has. And Duke City's basically, or not basically, I guess technically they're not out, but they're out of playoff contention for all intents and purposes. So why not give Rodgers a whirl? And on the other side for San Antonio, this certainly wasn't the game they expected to play against Duke City. I think they came in as 10.5 point favorites, but you got to be happy that you were able to walk away with the win here. Coming off of a bye and coming off of a game 2 weeks ago where Sam Castronova at quarterback was a little banged up and did not have his best game, had arguably his worst game of the season against Bay Area. He he looked back to his form to an extent. He had a casual 6 touchdown day. So um, it's crazy to think that 6 touchdown performance isn't up to form, but based on what Castronova has shown this year, 7-8 is within his reach with ease. But I digress. Um, he you could tell that he was still recovering from whatever injury he had. His padding was a little bit thicker on the interior of his jersey, so it looked to be like some type of upper body injury. And they weren't as, I don't want to say reckless because that sounds bad. They weren't as aggressive with him running the ball as they were in weeks past and earlier on in the season. Part of me wants to think it's because of the injury that he had and he's still recovering from, but he was able to successfully pick apart the Duke City defense in that fourth quarter and score as many points as they needed. 1 point, 1 point extra to be exact, in order to get the win. Wide receiver Naquan Murray, he had an outstanding game, hauling in 9 catches for 119 yards and 2 touchdowns. And their kicker, TC Stevens, he came up clutch in the fourth quarter. He had multiple successful deuce attempts on the kickoff, which ultimately won them the game. So offense was clicking, special teams dialed it in late. Defense played pretty well in the first half, but it just turned into a shootout in the fourth quarter. Gunslingers are still alive in the playoff hunt for now, but they just have to keep on winning from here. But this game was sneaky good and was a very fun watch. So highly recommend going back and watching this. If you don't watch the whole game, at least watch the second half and the fourth quarter. The next game we're going to talk about is the Vegas Nighthawks at the Sioux Falls Storm, and Sioux Falls won this game in overtime, 46-40. So on the podcast last week during the preview and kind of guessing what the lines would be, I mentioned how Sioux Falls could be in a great spot to cover a double-digit spread, and not only did they cover, they decided to win the whole damn thing outright in overtime, and it was a thrilling finish. Sioux Falls played really solid in all 3 phases of the game, offense, defense, special teams, and they won the turnover battle while minimizing their own mistakes. Some of their own mistakes have been the nail in their own coffin over the past couple of weeks, but they minimized that and took advantage of Vegas's, and it resulted in the win. They didn't necessarily wow you on offense, but they were in some really good spots early where they didn't have to reinvent the wheel to get the ball moving. Special teams set them up with some really good kick returns, and they just had to stick with what they do best and avoid turnovers, which cost them last week, as we mentioned. And they got a bunch of stops on defense, including a fumble return for a touchdown by big defensive lineman Claude Davis, take back the momentum in the game and really put themselves in the driver's seat moving forward. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention kicker Dean Saris and his incredibly clutch kick with no time left in regulation to send it to overtime. Sioux Falls was down by 3. He kicks a long, I think it was 40+ yard field goal, hits the crossbar and bounces through the upright. It was thrilling. The home crowd went nuts. Anytime a doink goes in favor of the kicker, you gotta love it. So it was a thrilling finish, and Sioux Falls was able to score a touchdown in overtime and get a stop on Vegas. And this was a much needed win for Sioux Falls as they cling on to any potential playoff hopes heading into the final quarter of the season. And this was exactly the type of win that Sioux Falls needed to get some positive momentum going. On the other side, the Vegas Nighthawks, they're in a bit of a pickle here. So they started 7-0 and they looked like an unstoppable force on offense, scoring 60 plus points multiple times while also leaving some points on the field. So they were able to score 60 plus, and they took their foot off the gas a handful of times earlier in the season and made some crucial mistakes that could have led to 70 plus, 80 plus points being scored. But that seems like a millennia ago compared to what we've been seeing over the past couple of weeks. Since starting 7-0, they've lost 3 straight games and they can't seem to get things back on track. Offense has been playing pretty well, all things considered. Defense has been giving up just way too many points. Starting at the quarterback position, I was under the impression that George Reyna was starting due to an injury to Jerome Johnson, but Johnson subbed into this game after Reyna got the start a handful of times and played multiple drives and didn't seem to be hampered by an injury. Is it an injury thing? Is it a performance thing? Because if it's a performance thing, that's confusing because he was one of the MVP favorites over the first 7-8 games of the season. Over the past couple, he went down with an injury and he wasn't playing as well as he could have. But we're not getting a lot of information from the team and the league. Surprise, surprise. So we're kind of left guessing on what's actually going on. But he doesn't appear to be hurt. They just appear to be going with Reyna at quarterback for whatever reason. And Reyna played pretty well. Like this is not a shot at George Reyna. Reyna played really well in this game, but as a team, Vegas had 4 turnovers in this one. And in the bigger picture, having 4 turnovers and only losing by 6 in overtime, that's not the worst thing in the world. It honestly isn't, but it has to be frustrating because they were number 1 in their conference 3 weeks ago. They've now lost 3 straight and they're dropping. They're dropping really quickly in the conference standings. So the situation with Jerome Johnson, something we'll have to monitor a little more closely as the season progresses, but it is a little concerning where, all right, Johnson is healthy enough to be subbed in and inserted into the game on every third drive, every other drive, whatever it ended up being. Is he not the best fit for the offense anymore? Is he not healthy to go a full 60 minutes? We don't know. So it's a very confusing situation in Vegas, and we'll have to see if they can get back to their early season form where they were just a wrecking crew, taking out any team in sight. The next game we're going to talk about is the Arizona Rattlers at the San Diego Strikeforce, and this was another game that was razor thin in the final score, where Arizona won 47-46. And heading into this game, I expected it to be possibly the best game of the entire weekend. And while it was pretty entertaining, it was also pretty damn ugly at times by both offenses. And you look at the scoreboard and it said, you see 47-46, you're like, oh, team scored, 93 points combined. That's pretty good. There were lots of mistakes and lots of turnovers in this one. There were 9 total turnovers in this game. And it just seemed like neither team really wanted to win this one. And which is shocking because the winner would have been in sole possession of the final playoff spot heading into the final quarter of the season. So it didn't seem like either team wanted it. Both teams making costly mistakes in terms of interceptions, fumbles, you name it. But starting with Arizona, they had an uncharacteristically bad game on offense, but they were still able to get away with a victory here, which is huge for them. Dalton Sneed, he's usually very precise and doesn't make mistakes. He only went in 15 for 34 passing, throwing 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Just for reference, he threw 2 interceptions all of last season with Bay Area. He threw 3 this past weekend against San Diego. So they couldn't get much going on offense, and they managed to hold on to win in the second half, but it was thanks to some San Diego mistakes that we'll touch on in just a bit. But the Rattlers only managed to score 2 field goals and 1 touchdown in the second half of this game. And fortunately for them, it was enough to escape San Diego with the 1-point victory, and they're in sole possession of that 4th playoff spot right now. But this was not a good game for Arizona. And if San Diego made 1 or 2 less mistakes and had 1 or 2 less turnovers, this would have gone very differently. On the other side, San Diego just can't seem to win a close game this year, and that's got to be so frustrating for them. They have 5 losses on the season, and those 5 losses have been by a total of 12 points. They've lost 5 games by a total of 12 points. So that's gotta hurt. And I think what hurts more is that all of them were very winnable in the final moments of the game if one thing goes differently. And this one in particular, they missed a field goal with, I think, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes left to extend the lead to nine. And then they also missed a field goal with no time left to win the game by two. So they just can't seem to put everything together and piece together a game-winning drive in these situations there where they're very, very close games. And they just need to get off to a better start, and they need a more clean start to these games. That's been the theme for all the games that they've lost up to this point. They start off sometimes trying to do too much, getting a little sloppy, making mistakes here and there, turning the ball over early, but then they come in the second half like a bat out of hell and start lighting up the scoreboard and putting themselves in contention to win the game. So you look at the games that they've won, they came out to a good to decent start in the first half, minimizing mistakes, and laid it on them in the second half. Second half has never been the issue for San Diego. They find ways to make games competitive, and they've come out on top in a handful. Unfortunately, haven't come out on top in less than a handful of them. But San Diego, they've got to find a way to win the close one. They're such a good team. They faced a lot of adverse situations with some suspensions, with some injuries, and they're in a good spot if they can get out of their own way and clean things up. And then this one, right before halftime, they managed to put themselves in a 13-point hole heading into halftime by throwing an interception that got returned for a touchdown with no time left in the first half. So if even if that interception goes into an incompletion, they kick a field goal, they're only down three. That was a 10-point swing on that final play. And even if they score a touchdown, they go in tied or leading by one. But that poor throw, let's just call it what it is. It was a poor throw, was a little bit of contact on the defense there, but it was still not the best throw you could make in that situation. They put themselves in that 13-point hole. They erased it and came back, and they were winning late in this game. But if they didn't put themselves in that hole early, they wouldn't have had to have the theatrics and heroics in the second half. They just wouldn't have needed it if they had just taken care of the football better in the first half and not made those sloppy mistakes. So San Diego is no longer in control of their own destiny in terms of the playoffs, and they have a tough road ahead with Bay Area, Northern Arizona, and Vegas as four of their final five games. So this is going to be a crucial test for San Diego, and it's a good thing. If we're being honest, it's a good thing because those three teams are likely to be making the playoffs. So those are the teams you're going to have to face in the playoffs anyway. So you might as well get battle tested. And if you're able to get some wins against some of those teams, that's got to build the momentum. That's got to build the confidence to do it again in the playoffs and make a run. In the final game of the IFL slate this past weekend, it was the Tucson Sugar Skulls at the Bay Area Panthers, and this was the only game that wasn't close at all. I think the closest the game was when the game kicked off. From there, it was very apparent what was going to happen. Bay Area won this game 51-12, and that 12 is deceiving, which we'll touch on in a bit. But starting with Bay Area, you got the feeling heading into this game that this was going to be extremely lopsided, and it certainly was. Bay Area was fresh coming off of a bye week. They've been building momentum over the past month or so since losing to Vegas a few weeks back. They've gotten better and better. They've found their identity of being ground and pound and playing great defense. Meanwhile, Tucson was on the opposite end of the spectrum. They're just falling apart over in Tucson. Starting at the quarterback position, Tucson placed Malik Mitchell, their starting quarterback for the majority of the year, on the RTR list, which is the refuse to report list. And they ended up signing quarterback Zach Reeder, who was most recently with the Iowa Barnstormers a little bit earlier on in the season, and he was released by them. Pair that with new wide receivers acquired via a trade over the past week, and it's a lot for any team to handle, especially at this point in the season. We're talking week 13, new quarterback, new wide receivers. It's a lot of new faces. But then you put them up against the best team in the IFL right now in the Bay Area Panthers. That's not a good situation for anybody at all. There wasn't much positive for Tucson in this one. If we're just being honest, they did a decent job of distributing the ball amongst the skill position players in the running game, but they found themselves down 51-6 with less than a minute left, and they scored a touchdown with 5 seconds left to make it 12. So they only had 6 points on the board for a very long time, and it was looking like if Bay Area made a stand, that Tucson would have ended this game with 6 points on the board. So absolutely abysmal by IFL standards to only have 6 points in a half, in a quarter sometimes, let alone in 59 minutes and 55 seconds of gameplay. And Tucson's in a tough spot. Bay Area's defense just absolutely dominated the Sugar Skulls from start to finish, especially the secondary. The Bay Area secondary does not get enough credit and does not get enough love for the job that they've done, not just in this game, but all season up to this point. And they just made this game look easy. On offense, like I mentioned, Bay Area continued their ground and pound style, and they had a pretty balanced attack with the duo of quarterback Daquan Neal and running back Shane Simpson, each getting 45 yards on the ground, totaling 3 rushing touchdowns between the two of them. But Neal also flashed some of the big playability with a couple of big time throws to wide receiver JT Stokes to really blow this thing open early on in the game and force Tucson into some uncomfortable situations against that ferocious Bay Area defense. So Bay Area continues to be the cream of the crop in this league, and Tucson seems to be starting from scratch in week 13, which isn't great. So these teams are trending in totally opposite directions. If you look at anybody's power rankings, Bay Area is probably number 1, Tucson's probably last, just because these two teams could not be any farther apart in terms of how they look on the field and how their rosters are looking up to this point as well. So it wouldn't surprise me to see Bay Area finish as the number 1 team in the league at the end of the season. And it would surprise me even less to see Tucson with the worst record in the league either. So it's a tough situation in Tucson, but a great situation in Bay Area. So that was week 13. Again, 5 games were decided by 3 points or less. Only 1 game was a real blowout, but every other one was a nail biter and came down to the final possession. So big shout out to all the teams, coaches, players, personnel, behind the scenes people in the IFL for making one of the best weeks of football I've seen all season on any level of the game. And the streams were good. The quality of football was good for the most part. And it was just such a fun experience watching all these games on Saturday. Looking ahead to week 14 of the IFL this upcoming weekend, all 6 teams will be in action in 8 games starting on Friday, going on Saturday, and concluding on Sunday. So starting on Friday night, we've got the Jacksonville Sharks at the Green Bay Blizzard, and that game kicks off at 7:05 Central. Green Bay is going to be a massive favorite in this one, to nobody's surprise, right? Green Bay is 9-2 on the year, the number 1 team in the Eastern Conference, arguably one of the best teams not arguably, one of the best teams in the IFL. In Jacksonville, they're on the opposite end of that, right? They haven't beat a team not named Tulsa all year, and Jacksonville has struggled at times on offense, and they're facing a defense that is going to put them to the biggest test of the year up to this point. So I would expect Green Bay to open up probably as 14, 15-point favorites at home. This over-under is probably going to be in the mid-80s, probably like an 86.5, just because Green Bay didn't look great on offense last week, while Jacksonville overperformed a little bit. So probably going to be in the mid-80s, around the 86.5 mark, but I would fully expect Green Bay to roll in this one. Next game we're going to talk about kicks off the Saturday night slate of games. It's going to be the San Antonio Gunslingers at the Massachusetts Pirates. And San Antonio, this is an interesting matchup for both teams, because San Antonio, they have one of the best offenses in all the IFL. They're able to drop 50 points with ease on any given week, it seems like. And they're going up against a defense in Massachusetts that's pretty stout and pretty good across the board. So strength on strength in this one. Massachusetts' defense has definitely been the strength of their team. San Antonio's offense has been the strength of theirs. San Antonio's defense, not so much. Massachusetts' offense over the past month or so, not so much either. So it's strength on strength, weakness on weakness in this one. I would expect Massachusetts to be probably the favorite, not as by not as much as you would think. Probably like a 6.5, 7.5 point favorite. just because of the travel to Lowell, Massachusetts from San Antonio isn't great. But I would expect this over under to be in the low 90s, probably like a 93.5. I guess that's close to mid 90s, 93.5, 94.5, somewhere in that range. But this is going to be a good one, probably one of the more interesting matchups of the entire weekend. Next up, we've got the Quad City Steamwheelers at the Iowa Barnstormers. This game is kicking off at 7:05 Central on Saturday, and this is going to be a very, very important game in the Eastern Conference playoff hunt. If Quad City is able to win this game, they'll move to 6-5, and Iowa will drop to 3-8. And they are right now the number 4 and 5 slots in the Eastern Conference standings. So that gap is going to stretch if Quad City is able to get the win here. Both of these teams have played each other very close. Iowa won by 2 earlier in the season. Quad City won by 2 earlier in the season in very high scoring games. So I'd anticipate this one to be high scoring as well. I would expect this over under to probably be in the mid 90s, like a 95, 96, just based on the first 2 games scoring well over 100 in each of those. I would anticipate Quad City being the road favorite in this one, being that they are 5-5 and coming off of a massive win against Frisco last week. I would expect Quad City to be a 4.5, 5.5 point favorite heading into Iowa, but Iowa was a pretty good team over these past couple of weeks, and they seem to have found a little bit of lightning in a bottle with quarterback Daniel Smith. So this will be a good one, and again, very important for the Eastern Conference playoff hunt. Next game we're going to talk about is the Vegas Nighthawks at the Duke City Gladiators, and if there was ever a get right game for Vegas, it's this one. Vegas has lost 3 games in a row and has seemed to lost their way a little bit as a team. And going up against Duke City, who's only won 1 game all year, they're sitting at 1-9 on the season. This is the chance for them to right the ship and get back in the win column. So Vegas is for sure going to be the favorite, probably an 11.5, 12.5 point favorite, just based on both teams being at opposite ends of the standings in the Western Conference right now. But if Duke City starts Hassan Rogers at quarterback, this could be a lot more interesting than what it may look like on paper. So I hope Duke City does that. I'm not sure if they will. Not fully confident in their decision making, if we're just being honest. But Vegas has the chance to right the ship here, and if all goes according to plan, they should do that here. Next game we're going to talk about is the Sioux Falls Storm at the Tulsa Oilers. This game's also kicking off at 7:05 Central. And this game, we've talked about elimination games over the past couple of weeks. This one is a legit elimination game in the playoff hunt. It's incredible that Tulsa is still somehow alive in the playoff hunt, being 3-8, and Sioux Falls is somehow alive, being 3-7. But they're both in the mix, just because the middle of the Eastern Conference has been very muddy through the first 12 weeks of the season. Both are technically alive and both need a win desperately in order to continue to move up. So they're in a situation where, for Sioux Falls in particular, if they win and Iowa loses, they'll leapfrog Iowa into that 5th spot and be knocking on the door of a potential push for the 4th playoff spot, but they'll need a ton of help to get there. So whoever loses this game is basically out at this point of the season. So I would anticipate Sioux Falls being the favorite in this one, despite being the road team, just because they had a big win last week against Vegas, and Tulsa had a heartbreaker last week against Jacksonville. So I would anticipate Sioux Falls being like a 2.5, 3.5 point favorite, not by much, because the margin between these teams is not it's not a lot. Both teams have struggled on offense at times and have played opportunistic defense to keep them in games, but offenses for Sioux Falls has gotten a lot better over these past 5 or 6 weeks, while Tulsa only showed signs of life for the first time last week over the past month or so. So I would anticipate this total probably being in the low 80s, maybe like an 82.5, 83.5 in that range, with, again, Sioux Falls being like a 3.5 point favorite here. Next game we're going to preview is the Frisco Fighters at the Tucson Sugar Skulls. This game is kicking off at 8:05 Central, and Frisco's probably going to roll on Tucson, especially coming off of a loss last week to Quad City. Frisco's going to be nice and pissed off, and they're going to take it out on Tucson, who scheduling-wise cannot seem to catch a break, getting Bay Area last week and Frisco this upcoming week. Will we see Justin Rankin make his Frisco debut in 2024? Maybe. We'll have to see. But regardless of who gets to start at running back for Frisco, they're going to roll big time on this one. Frisco has gotten a ton of double-digit spreads in their favor over the course of this season because they're a very good team. And I think we'll definitely see another one here, probably looking at a 14, 13-point spread. Frisco is just night and day better than Tucson, while Tucson's in seems to be in active rebuild mode in week 13, heading into week 14 of the season, while Frisco's kind of sharpening their swords and getting ready for the playoff push. So Frisco's probably going to be 13, 14 point favorites. Total wise, I'd probably expect this one to be like a 89, 90, 91, somewhere in that high 80s, low 90s range, just because of what Frisco brings to the table. And hopefully Tucson will be able to put up a fight, but Frisco's going to roll. Next game we're going to talk about also kicks off at 8:05 Central, and this one's taking place between the Northern Arizona Wranglers at the Arizona Rattlers. So right now, Northern Arizona is in that 3 spot in the Western Conference standings for the playoffs, and Arizona's in that 4 spot right now. So if Arizona can win this game, they could potentially take another step up the standings and potentially get in contention for that third spot. So this is going to be an interesting one. On paper, both teams play each other pretty close. Opening game of the year was a rough one, not really a good sample size for what Northern Arizona has been since then. But I would expect Northern Arizona to be the favorite here, despite being the road team, just because they've been very dynamic on offense over their past 3-4 games. And I would expect Northern Arizona to probably be like 4.5 point favorites. Nothing too big, nothing too crazy. Arizona's been a very good team over the past 2 months or so, but offensively they looked very, very bad, and were lucky to get a win against San Diego last week. Total wise, I would expect this total to probably be in the mid 90s, probably like a 95, 96, because both offenses, when they're clicking, can score points in bunches. Quarterback Josh Jones for the Northern Arizona Wranglers, he brings a lot to the table with his arm and his leg, and so does Dalton Sneed for Arizona. So this one's going to be a very good game and very entertaining to watch. And the final game of the slate is taking place on Sunday at 5:05 Central. And the two most exciting words in all of indoor football is the California Clash. And we've got one taking place between the San Diego Strike Force at the Bay Area Panthers. Both these teams have played each other twice already early in the season. Bay Area won both of those games, but both of those games were instant classics. So much fun to watch. Went down to the last play of the game and were just absolute nail biters in both of them. And both these teams play very entertaining football. Bay Area has to be the favorite in this one. I would expect probably 6.5, 7.5 point favorites, being the home team and being the clear number one team in the IFL, at least record wise right now. San Diego needs this one badly. They need to dethrone Bay Area in the worst way. They've lost narrowly to Bay Area twice already. Again, we talked about it earlier. They've lost their 5 games by a total of 12 points, and 2 of those losses were to Bay Area. So they need to steal a victory versus Bay Area in this one, and they have the team and the ability to do it. They just have to avoid those costly mistakes in the first half and not put themselves in a hole where they have to have some late game heroics in order to stay in contention. So again, Bay Area probably going to be 6.5, 7.5 point favorites. Total wise, I would not be surprised to see this one in the hundreds, but because of how Bay Area's defense has been playing, and honestly how San Diego's defense has been playing, I'd expect this total to be in the low 90s, probably like a 92.5. So this is going to be one of the more entertaining games of this last quarter of the season. So definitely watch this one on Sunday. So that was a look ahead to IFL Week 14 this upcoming weekend, but let's take a look at this past weekend of AFL games as well. AFL Week 7 took place, and it was a pretty good slate of games and featured 2 of the very best games of the year so far. But starting off the weekend, we had Washington Wolfpack taking on the Salina Liberty, and Salina won this game in very convincing fashion, 42-7. Washington Wolfpack, they scored first at the beginning of the second quarter and they took a 7-0 lead, but it was literally all Salina from there. Starting with Washington, their offense is broken. A lot of their offense is dependent on their quarterback scrambling and turning something out of nothing, and that's not good if your offense is basically based around that. Their O-line was terrible in this game. Salina had 12 sacks in this one, and they seem to be putting pressure on the quarterback on every single play. And it seems like a blatant talent problem on the field. And when you dive into the roster of the Washington Wolfpack, a lot of the roster, or not, I shouldn't say a lot of the roster, but some of the key pieces of the roster seem to be local homegrown talent that had a previous relationship with the head coach already, and not necessarily the best possible bunch of players you could field on the team for the Wolfpack. So that's a part of it, but Coaching wise and play calling wise, this was not a good look for Washington. So many of their plays in the first half were long developing plays that would require the quarterback to have a clean pocket for 3, 4, 5 seconds. And they were getting pressured with less than 2 seconds after the snap. A defensive lineman was in the quarterback's face and he was having a run for his life. And they didn't make any adjustments until the second half. And by that time, Salina was already rolling on offense and running away with the game. So we didn't really see very many short passes and screens until that third quarter. That's when they started to effectively move the ball, but the offensive line just played so poorly. They were seemingly getting sacked every other play. They couldn't get much positive momentum going beyond that touchdown to open the second quarter and open the scoring in the game. So this was a tough one for Washington, and they're just overall as a team dysfunctional on offense, and their only win is coming in a blowout against a pieced together Rapid City team that was not really Rapid City. So Washington is looking rough, and I think they might be the worst team in the AFL right now, just based on what we've seen so far this season. But pivoting over to Salina, Salina played really well in this game, and you got to take the hat off and give a tip of the cap to the coaching staff for the pivot that they made on offense. So their quarterback Charles McCollum was hurt in their previous game, and Jamario Benson had to come in and finish that last game. And Benson started this game at quarterback. Benson is a much more mobile threat than Charles McCollum. Charles McCollum is very good at throwing the ball, not as mobile, but can be if he needs to, while Benson's the opposite. The element of his game that is his strength is his dual threat ability. So they pivoted from being very pass heavy to being a read option, power run heavy offense. And they looked good while doing it. They became very run heavy and run centric with Benson, and it worked. Tracy Brooks, running back for Salina, had 4 touchdowns on the day, 3 on the ground, and 1 on a catch and run on a slick little play action to the wide receiver, to a wide receiver or to a running back screen to Brooks, housed it all the way for a touchdown. So they looked very good, and they adjusted their approach just enough to take advantage of the strengths of the players that they have. And the defense terrorized the Washington offense all game. Like I alluded to earlier, like I mentioned earlier, 12 sacks by Salina, including 7 by Henry Kellogg at defensive end. So Henry Kellogg, Travis Taylor, Joshua Frazier, and I'm sure I'm missing a couple other names. So please forgive me, Liberty folks. But yeah, the Washington quarterbacks, they were running for their lives all game, and they could not get much going early. They could not get much going late, and this Liberty defense caused a lot of panic and caused a couple turnovers as well. So giving up only 7 points in an arena football game is quite the accomplishment. So big congrats to the Salina Liberty for their defensive performance here. Just total domination from start to finish. Next game we're going to talk about is the Nashville Cats traveling to Billings, Montana to take on the Billings Outlaws. And Nashville won this game 57-54 in a thriller that saw the Billings Outlaws get their first loss of the season. And Nashville had a new face at quarterback. Last week, we talked about both of Nashville's quarterbacks being a bit banged up and not really getting the most out of them. And with Ramon Atkins, he was more of a dual threat that wasn't being allowed to be a dual threat, while Dalton Oliver was just extremely banged up and could not do what he needed to do. So they brought in an AFL veteran. They brought in Randy Hippard to play quarterback for Nashville, and he looked incredible. Might have had the best quarterback game in all the AFL this year. He went 34 for 38 passing with 321 yards and 6 touchdowns, including the game-winning touchdown pass with 1 second left on the clock to go ahead. Basically, straight off the couch was what this quarterback came from, and he turned in an electric game. They had lots of quick passes, lots of screens, lots of opportunity to get the ball into the wide receiver's hands early. Literally the opposite of what Washington was doing, and it worked out pretty well for Nashville. So at wide receiver, Marquise Irvin for Nashville had 11 catches for 148 yards and 2 touchdowns. Milton Williams had 11 catches for 74 yards and a touchdown. Kendrick Ings had 8 catches for 67 yards and 2 touchdowns. So just prolific numbers for the Nashville offense. And again, taking advantage of the skills and abilities of the players that they have around them, getting the ball out of Randy Hippard's hands quick into the hands of Marquise Irvin, who's one of the best wide receivers in all of arena and indoor football. Last year, he was great with the Green Bay Blizzard. This year, he's been good in flashes for the Nashville Cats, depending on who was at quarterback. And when you get somebody that can get the ball in his hands often and let him make a play, this is the type of game that you get. So this is a night and day different team, especially on offense for Nashville, and it shows what they can be again if they play to the strengths of the players that they have on the field and on the roster. So it was a new offensive approach, new alignments, a new plan of attack. Something that's bothered me about Nashville over the course of the first half of the season is that they utilize that running back spot. They've basically been just using it as a fourth offensive lineman and not even involving that aspect of potentially a running game or disguising a running game or having that person go out for a pass. In this game, they had a technically a defensive lineman, but he looked more like a prototypical Mac linebacker, running back from the old school AFL days, who ended up scoring a touchdown on a touchdown run and just more so looked the part and was able to play that role very, very well. So they looked like a more prototypical AFL offense. They were slinging the ball on short routes, on medium routes, even on deep routes at times, very accurately. So this might have been the most impressive offensive performance we've seen out of any AFL team this year, and it came off of a short week for their signed quarterback. So could not be more impressed by Nashville with their performance. And on the other side, Billings played really well in all three phases, which is shocking to hear when you see that they gave up 57 points. But they just kind of made some late mistakes that allowed Nashville to come back in this game. They just got outdueled down the stretch. They ended up having 3 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns, a kick return touchdown, a fumble return touchdown. So they were balanced all across the board in all phases of the game, but they just had a couple of costly mistakes, including a bad interception from Isaac Harker late that left the door open and allowed Nashville to come back. And they had a few opportunities to put the game away, but they just couldn't capitalize. So Billings is still one of the top teams in all the AFL, and they should be in a good spot for the playoffs. Don't know what that's going to look like just yet. We're supposed to get some clarity at halftime from Commissioner Fisher. According to Arena Fan, we're supposed to get an idea of what was going on there, but they didn't really share too much information. So hopefully we'll get some info either this week or next about what the playoff picture is going to look like. But Billings is going to be around. Billings is going to be a very tough team to beat in the playoffs. You like to see, if you're a Billings fan, it hurts losing, but you want to see this game now so that they get the gut punch and they're able to get it corrected moving forward, and they're able to get some things figured out to avoid this happening again. But Dwayne Brown at wide receiver / DB, he's actually one of the few true Ironman players of the AFL, even though Ironman's not a thing, but I digress. He ended up having 7 catches for 114 yards and a touchdown. He had that kick return touchdown that I alluded to earlier. He also had a very good fake field goal run. I think this might be the first fake field goal we've seen in the AFL this year, where it was a direct snap to the man who was blocking, which was Dwayne Brown, and he took it on a 4th and 15 and ran for like 20, 25 yards, somewhere in that range. So it was a very slick play. Very, very, very cool design, and it was good to see yet another wrinkle from this Billings play calling team. But Isaac Harker, he had a pretty good game. He went 16 for 23 with 3 touchdowns in that 1 interception that just came at the worst possible time. But like I said, Billings, they got gut checked. They'll be fine. I fully believe in this coaching staff to be able to correct some of the mistakes that they made in this game and keep their foot on the gas pedal and not allow another team to get back in the fold. They've got Albany they've got the Albany game in a couple of weeks. So very much looking forward to this one. I think they have Washington next week. So that one's going to be, if you're Washington, you hate to play Billings coming off of a gut check game like this, but Billings will be fine. They have a very good team, very solid team, very good coaching staff. So this game as a whole was a banger, and highly recommend checking this one out on the Arena Football League's YouTube page. Next game we're going to talk about is the Albany Firebirds at the West Texas Desert Hawks, and Albany won this game 73-70 in overtime. You heard that right, 73-70 in overtime. This was a crazy game to watch. Starting with Albany jumped out to a 41-13 lead in the first half, and it looked like Albany was just going to roll. score 60 plus, another game like they had against Southwest Kansas a few weeks back. But West Texas was fighting and clawing and got their way back into this one. For Albany, the offense was on fire all game. They just made some mistakes to let West Texas get back in this game. And this included 3 interceptions, which is something you haven't seen from Jake Medlock up to this point. And a common theme with the Firebirds this year is penalties, 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 extending drives for the West Texas Desert Hawks and putting their offense in bad spots. So penalties are going to be something to continue to examine when you look at the Firebirds or as you watch Firebirds games in the futures. But there were no stats at the time of recording. This is on Monday, so I haven't seen stats, but I went through and kind of jotted some notes down after rewatching some of the highlights of the game. Jake Medlock ended up having 5 touchdown passes and 1 rushing touchdown. Darius Prince, 3 touchdown passes, including one that he caught that bounced off the net. Medlock just threw it, and it seemed like a desperation play, but it might have been. I'm sure if you ask him, he'll be like, "Yeah, I meant to do that." But he chucked it, bounced off the net, and Darius Prince was able to field it off the bounce. So very cool catch there. Molinich, the running back, had a receiving touchdown and a rushing touchdown as well. But Mark Orozco is arguably the MVP of this game for the Firebirds. He had 3 successful deuce attempts and the game-winning field goal in overtime to win it, as well as a ton of extra points all throughout the game. He put a lot of pressure on West Texas to keep up, and West Texas answered the bell with some kicking, with a kicking game of their own. But Orozco played very, very well in this one. In West Texas, they had this game within striking distance towards the end. I alluded to this earlier, but Albany was up 41-13 in the first half. That's a 28-point lead in the first half. West Texas was able to erase that. And this was a tie game, and they were going blow for blow towards the end, eventually going to overtime when the score was 70-70. So West Texas had some moments early on. I think 5 or 6 minutes into the game, they were down 18-0 due to a touchdown, extra point, deuce, immediate turnover, touchdown, extra point, deuce. So they were in an 18-point hole 5 or 6 minutes into the game, which is crazy to think about. But West Texas did a great job of fighting and clawing back. They just had to overcome some early mistakes that really put them in a bad spot. But they had Albany in a spot on 4th and goal, but a bad penalty gave Albany another chance to score, and they took it, and they did. So West Texas had an opportunity when this game was tied 63-63 to stuff them on 4th and goal and get a turnover on downs and drive down the field and win the game, but they allowed Albany to get another shot to score. Albany did, and the rest is history. Albany ended up winning this game in overtime. But Isaiah Scott for West Texas at wide receiver, he played for the Oregon Black Bears a little bit earlier on in the year, and we know what happened with Oregon and how they folded after 4 games or 5 weeks, whatever it was. But he had an incredible game, an absolutely incredible game for West Texas. He had 7 catches with 3 receiving touchdowns rather, and 3 rushing touchdowns as well. They really utilized him in some old school AFL ways where they were motioning him into the backfield, and he was the high motion man, lined up as a running back, taking handoffs with the running back being like a lead blocker. He had three rushing touchdowns in the first half, 3 receiving touchdowns in the second half. Just an absolutely crazy good game for Isaiah Scott. So big shout out to him. Go check out the Off the Wall Instagram page later on this week. By the time this releases, should have a video recapping some of those things, some of those touchdowns by Isaiah on Instagram. But Henry Nell, kicker for West Texas, also had 3 deuce attempts. So we alluded to Mark Orozco really putting the pressure on West Texas with deuces all throughout the game. Henry Nell did a great job of answering that call and supplying some deuces of his own to keep West Texas in it and be able to connect on quite a few extra points as well. But Nick Marshall on defense, he was really one of the folks that got the Desert Hawks back in this. He had 2 interceptions, and he played really, really well on defense, all things considered. When you're playing against the Albany wide receiver group, you got to take your victories where you can. But the fact that he was able to get 2 interceptions himself was a big win. But yeah, this was an insane game as you can tell by the 143 points scored between the two. So this is definitely a certified banger in off the wall terms. So if you're gonna look for an AFL game to watch over the next couple of weeks, if you're looking to get into it or you're looking to get a friend into it, share the Albany West Texas game from this past week. This is the one you want to share. And some news came out over the past 24 hours as I'm recording this that the West Texas head coach, Coach Siegfried, is out as head coach, which is shocking because West Texas has been a very good team and they've been very competitive in every game they've played this year. They've just lost some nail biters to some really good teams. They've lost to Billings by 6. They lost to Orlando by I think 9. They lost to Albany by 3. So they're sitting at 3-4 right now, but that 3-4 record is very deceiving as this West Texas team is very, very good. Coach Siegfried tweeted out that his time as head coach came to, quote, an abrupt end. We don't know what that means yet. So hopefully we'll get some clarity here, whether it be from him, whether it be from West Texas moving forward. But West Texas had the potential to be a very dangerous team if they were to find a way to sneak into the playoffs, and they had the ability to make a run without Coach Siegfried in place. I don't know if that's possible. We'll have to see how that shakes out or who assumes play calling and coaching responsibilities from here. But a tough blow for West Texas as they have the talent to make a run. They just have played a very tough schedule, and they've held their own. If we're just being honest, they've held their own against some of the best teams in the AFL up to this point. And yeah, it's just an unfortunate way for it to end. But Albany maintains their undefeated record. They're 7-0 on the season, and they take on the Orlando Predators in Albany next week. So that's going to be a very, very good game, a rematch of their Week 1 game that kicked off the entire AFL season. So that's going to be a good one. Highly suggest tuning in. The final game of the AFL slate from this past weekend is going to be the Wichita Regulators at the Southwest Kansas Storm. And Southwest Kansas won this game 35-12. So starting with Southwest Kansas, quarterback Matt Struck had 3 rushing touchdowns on the day. And Southwest Kansas loves to do a lot of quarterback power where the quarterback receives the snap, immediately tucks the ball, follows the running back as a lead blocker within the red zone. And it worked. It worked pretty well. It took a couple tries for them to get into the end zone on their first couple drives, but they eventually got in and they were able to be pretty productive with that play in the red zone. They were able to pass the ball pretty effectively to get down the field. They didn't really have any plays that were crazy big plays like a 45-yard bomb, 35-yard bomb, but they were able to dink and dunk down the field and power it in with their quarterback. So defense played really well as well. They applied a ton of pressure all game. They didn't get a ton of sacks on the day, but they were able to apply enough pressure where it seemed like every single time Wichita was dropping back, you were like, oh, this might be the one. The pass rush for Southwest Kansas was unbelievable and was really on one for this one. Will Miles, he was super disruptive. Keon Clary at DB, he had 2 interceptions in the second half, returning 1 for a touchdown. He had a third one that got called back due to a defensive penalty, but he's been showing out all year. So the fact that you have somebody like Keon Clary and Michael Lawson in the same defensive backfield, Southwest Kansas has a sneaky good defense, and they're kind of turning the corner over these past couple of weeks. Not against the better opponents, let's just call it for what it is, but the fact that they're able to dominate like they have is a good sign. And depending on how the playoff scenario and the playoff structure turns out to be, we could find Southwest Kansas finding their way in. And then Marquise Lawson Greenwood on the defensive line as well. Big shout out to him for the pressure he was applying all game. He had lots of hurries and lots of pressure. He finally got a sack late in the game. But yeah, Southwest Kansas played really well in this one on defense and did just enough on offense to really work the clock and make sure that they were able to seal this win and improve their record to 4-3 on the year. And over on the other side for Wichita, they were in this game in the first half. They were in it up until the point where their starting quarterback, Charlie Brewer, went out with an injury into the first half. On the play he got injured, he had some pressure being applied by the Southwest Kansas defense, and he was trying to get away from it and was getting sacked, ended up throwing the ball out of bounds, and it looks like he just landed awkwardly. So to add insult to injury, he got a roughing the pass, or not a roughing the passer, an intentional grounding penalty on top of it. So up to that point, Wichita was in this. Brewer had a rushing touchdown, and he was able to find find his wide receiver Daniel McKinney for a wild over-the-wall touchdown catch as well. Quarterback Joseph Hess ended up coming in for Brewer, but he couldn't really get much going. It's tough for any backup quarterback to come into a situation like that and kind of take over and try to make the best of it. But for Hess in particular, he's a left-handed quarterback. So I felt like, to me, that played a part of it, where Brewer's a traditional right-handed quarterback, and you wouldn't think it's as big of a difference switching from a right-handed quarterback to a left-handed quarterback, but it can be, because the ball release is different, the timing of the routes are different, the area, the blind side is different, the area of the field that the quarterback feels more comfortable throwing to is different. It just changes everything for an offense. So I feel like the combination of the backup coming in and then having to switch all those things around also was just too much to overcome for Wichita. So that being said, you would think that if you have two quarterbacks, you would want them both to be righties, or you would want them both to be lefties. So in these situations, that doesn't occur. But that's just my take and my view on how the game unfolded. But if Charlie Brewer finishes this game and doesn't get hurt, Wichita, I think, has a pretty good chance of staying competitive in this one and giving Southwest Kansas another scare. Because if you remember earlier in the season, while this game wasn't streamed, Wichita beat Southwest Kansas in Wichita. So Wichita had a chance in this one. They were staying, they were keeping up with Southwest Kansas in this one, but their injury to their starting quarterback was just too much to overcome. And the defense adapted to what Southwest Kansas was doing in the second half. Didn't give up a ton of yardage and didn't give up a ton of points either. But yeah, it was just a tough go for Wichita, and yeah, they're sitting at 1-4 on the year to this point. So it's been a tough year for Wichita, but big shout out to them for being competitive in this one and being competitive in a couple of their other games. But good news for Wichita is I think they're better than Washington, so they're not the worst team in the AFL. But Wichita had some good things to build on here. If they can get Charlie Brewer back in the lineup, we'll have to see what the severity of his injury is, or if they can get a full week of practice with Joseph Hess, who has some arena experience of his own. They could be in a good spot moving forward. But yeah, Southwest Kansas really dominated this game on defense, and on offense they did just enough to win it. So that was AFL Week 7. Week 8 next weekend. It seems like the schedules are locked in for the remainder of the year, so we'll do a brief preview. We've got the Orlando Predators taking on the Albany Firebirds in Albany. We've got the Salina Liberty taking on the Wichita Regulators in Wichita. We've got the Southwest Kansas Storm taking on the West Texas Desert Hawks in Odessa, Texas. And then we've got the Washington Wolfpack going to face the Billings Outlaws. So Billings should absolutely roll Washington in that one. West Texas, Southwest Kansas, it just got a lot more interesting with the news of Coach Siegfried no longer being the coach. So Southwest Kansas has the opportunity to pull a fast one on West Texas and pull away and improve to 5-3 on the year, which I don't think a lot of people would have seen coming from Southwest Kansas before the season started. And then looking at the Salina Wichita game, Salina had an absolutely dominating performance last week, and you would think that they'd be able to take care of business against Wichita in this one. So Salina should be able to handle Wichita pretty well. But this Orlando-Albany game is looking very interesting because Albany is 7-0, the last undefeated team, but Orlando's sitting at 3-2 right now. They were sitting at 2-2, but I guess they got credited with a forfeit win for the Louisiana situation from earlier. So not sure how that all is shaken out. But Orlando played Albany really close in that opening week. They had a huge lead on the Firebirds early on, and Albany was able to come back. So Albany ended up winning that game 62-59. And these teams are a lot more even than it looks like on paper. So I would expect this game to be a lot closer than some people may think. Orlando has a very talented roster that was able to turn the corner over the past couple of weeks on offense, especially with Caleb Walls at wide receiver and Drew Powell at quarterback. Seems to have adapted to the arena game, coming from the IFL and coming from the indoor game. So Orlando has a very good chance to knock off Albany in this one. So if Albany comes out and plays the same way they did against West Texas with their interceptions, and they're probably going to have a ton of penalties in this game too, if the past 3-4 weeks are any indication of the future, Orlando has a pretty good shot at upsetting Albany here. And Albany's got to be on their P's and Q's. Like they got to play their best game in order to defeat Orlando again, because they get Orlando at the end of the season in the very last week as well. So That's going to be a very fun game, very entertaining game to watch. And if you're going to watch any game in the AFL this upcoming weekend, that's the one. And that's the show. Thank you so much for checking it out. Whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, we appreciate you taking the time. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, please go ahead and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, hop over to YouTube, help your boy out with a subscription, give us a like on this video. And if you're watching on YouTube, hop over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, your choice. Give us a rating and review on there. It'll help us climb the rankings and help out the old algorithm in our favor. And give us a follow on Instagram, Twitter/X, and TikTok at Off the Wall FB, F as in foot, B as in ball, Off the Wall FB on each of those. We would appreciate the follow there and some of the support. There's only 24 hours in a day, and the fact that you chose to spend an hour 15, hour 20, whatever this ends up being, with me on the show, I really appreciate it. We've got another solid week of IFL and AFL football up on the horizon. So looking forward to some of the games and looking forward to seeing how some of the playoff races in the IFL take shape, and looking forward to seeing how some of these teams in the AFL can continue to separate themselves, and as the playoff picture kind of takes shape in the AFL. We'll have to see what that looks like. Hopefully we'll get some clarity on that over the next couple of days. So appreciate you stopping by. Hope all is well in your world. Enjoy this upcoming weekend of football. Indoor and arena football season is quickly coming to a close, so I don't want to think about it, but enjoy the football that we're getting every weekend here, and hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care. Bye.